All right, everyone, we've been talking about culture. We're thinking a bit about how it is that culture shapes who we are, and in this context, shapes what our preferences are, the kinds of things we imagine to be really good or really bad, the kind of things we imagine to be, in this case, really tasty or really disgusting. So let's see. So I asked you to take this survey. And in the survey, the goal was to see what it is you would be willing to eat. Not in a silly sort of way, but really, what kinds of things are you likely to eat on a given daily basis, and what kinds of things would you be willing to eat if this was offered to you? And so what I really did was I posed two different animals. Now, eating meat is a very common thing in the U.S. especially, though there is a growing number of vegetarians and vegans out there. But eating meat is pretty common. The question really becomes, what kinds of meats do we find it acceptable to eat? What kinds of meats do we imagine ourselves being able to eat, and not even really recognizing once we're eating them that we're eating the flesh of an animal? Now, there's really no substantive difference, I mean, aside from things like taste. There really is no substantive difference between eating the meat of a cow or eating the meat of a dog or a cat or eating the meat of a horse relative to eating the meat of a chicken. All of them will have different flavor profiles potentially, but all of them are really doing the same thing, which is killing an animal and then taking the flesh and consuming the flesh. So in principle, there's no reason we should prefer to eat one kind over the other. And yet what we find is that in different societies, eating different kinds of meat is differently acceptable. So what I asked you to do then was to answer the following questions. First, have you eaten dog meat in the last 6 months? Right? And it turns out that none of you have done this. This should not be surprising. In our society, in our culture, we don't think about dogs as possible meat choices. They're furry creatures. They're our best friends, right? They're furry creatures that we take care of, that we have companionship with. And so we think about dogs in terms of pets rather than in terms of something that we could consume, an animal that we could eat. So basically, none of you, unsurprisingly, have eaten dog meat in the last 6 months or so. However, about 86% of you, so most of you in the class have eaten cow meat, have eaten some form of beef. And I suspect maybe there's some of you in that 10 to 12 or so percent down here that are, in fact, are already vegetarians, or maybe for other reasons don't eat beef. Beef is very prevalent in the United States. It is one of the meats that we eat, and so we think about cows and dogs very differently. Though they are animals, we think about dogs as pets, and we think about cows for consumption. Now, then I asked you how likely you would be to eat dogs relative to cows in the next, if someone were to offer you this in the next 6 months. And it turns out that 0% of you, right? You can't even see the bar because it is not there. 0% of you said you would be very likely to eat dog meat if you were offered that in the future. However, there is just under 10% of you said you would be somewhat likely. Maybe you're curious eaters, you're adventurous eaters, and some small percentage of you in the class, just shy of 10% of you, say that you're somewhat likely to eat dog meat in the next 6 months, if you were to be offered that. The bulk of you, however, approaching 100 or around 90% of you, if you put these two together, say that you would not be likely. And fully 3/4 of you said you were not at all likely to eat dog meat if you were to be offered that in the next 6 months. Now, of course, I asked the same question about cow meat, and the exact reverse is true. That is to say, the vast majority of you say that you are likely, either very likely or somewhat likely, to eat cow meat in the next 6 months if someone were to offer this to you. And then we have, again, our potentially our vegetarians down here who are not going to eat meat at all. So all this is to say, in principle, there's no reason that we should prefer or we should imagine dogs as pets and we should imagine cows as meat. But this is culturally what is prescribed. These are the social norms that we have grown up with, and if we transport ourselves to a different society, in a different time and place, say we transport ourselves into a place like India, where consuming cows is not culturally justified, cows are not seen as consumable animals, then we would have an entirely different reaction. And even at a gut emotional level, we might have a very different reaction. I imagine when I even asked the question to many of you, would you be likely to eat a dog, you recoil at even the thought of eating a dog, because in our society, what we think about, the way we have sort of, our emotions have been set up to think about dogs as pets in a way that we don't think about cows. So if we transport ourselves to a different society, again, a society like maybe in India, where cows are treated with a degree of reverence, treated not as animals for consumption, we would have an entirely different reaction to that question of would you be likely to eat cow meat in the next 6 months. All right. So this is just to get us primed to think about how it is that cultures shape not just what we think. In this case, we can clearly see a set of preferences develop out of that, but really think deeply about how you respond to just the question of being asked to eat dog meat. We recoil at this idea, and this tells us something about the way that societies create symbolic objects, in this context like a dog, and then generate a set of emotions and reactions to the idea of treating them differently than we're accustomed to treating them. Okay, so let's use this then to think a little bit more deeply about culture, and I will talk to you guys soon.